Hi guys, and welcome to Piano and Keyboard Artist, where we discuss the artists related to pianos, keyboards and synthesizers. And today is my first video on Tears for Fears. But I want to focus really on the vocals of Curt and Roland, and how a lot of people sometimes cannot hear the difference between the two singers. Before we jump into this, I want to make a special shout out to my good friends Andy McNabb and Mark Wibrow from the Electronic Cafe YouTube channel. Check them out. If you like this channel, you will love that channel. They go into a lot of detail about electronic music. I did smile yesterday when I opened my computer and I got a notification saying that the Electronic Cafe had just released a video on Tears for Fears. And I thought, no, you beat me to it. However, the video that I haven't watched their video yet, but I'm assuming, like all their videos, it's going to be very informative and content rich. So make sure you head over to the Electronic Cafe and subscribe. My video today is very much focused on Roland's voice and Curt's voice and the differences between the voices. And the most fascinating thing being that a lot of people can't actually tell the difference between the two singers, which if you're a fan, you will find very, very strange. But we were talking about this the other day in my patron group. I was having a Zoom chat with my patron members, and I was talking about this inability of people not being able to differentiate between Curt's voice and Roland's voice. And one of my patron members, who is actually a fan, he actually got it wrong. He was quite surprised to learn that Mad World was Curt and not Roland. So the point I'm trying to make here is if a fan can get it wrong, you know, what chance does a casual listener have trying to tell the difference between the two? Now, if I take it back to my own personal experience, when I heard Tears for Fears for the first time, and I must say that songs like Mad World, Shout, Head Over Heels, Change, these songs are actually greater than I think we give them credit for, and they really do define the 80s to me. But when I think the first music video I saw of Tears for Fears was Shout, and it's because of that reason that was the first video I saw that I naturally assumed that Roland was the singer. And then several years later, this must have been like in the early 90s when I bought that they have a greatest hits album called Tears Roll Down, the greatest hits of Tears for Fears 82 to 92. So it was about 92, 93 when I got that greatest hits album. I was very shocked when I saw a music video around about that time. And I saw Mad World and I saw Curt was singing. I was thinking, hang on here, he's not the singer. I always assumed that Roland was the singer. And the more I've spoken about that, a lot of people have said, oh my God, exactly the same with me. Remember, this is going back to the times, sort of before the internet and, when we were not that aware of things. All we had was, Top of the Pops and, magazines and smash hits and things like that. Certainly growing up in South Africa, we never had the media coverage that you guys had here in the UK. But anyway, the difference between Roland and Curt's voice is very obvious when you're a fan and you know it. However, if you're just sort of casually listening, if you were to hear Change, Mad World, and then listen to songs like Shout, you would be forgiven for thinking it's the same singer. Now, in this video, in order to demonstrate what I mean, I'm going to be using a lot of vocal coach terminology. Now, this is not to bore you, but it is the only way I can think of explaining it. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to use two polar opposite type of singers. Let's take, on this end, we're going to use Curt, Roland from Tears for Fears, and let's take Dave Vaughn from Depeche Mode. And on this side, we're going to use, let's say, Axl Rose and John Bon Jovi. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because these two polar opposites will demonstrate two very extremely different ways of singing. Of course, you've got the two polar opposites, and then in between there are a lot of different variables and different colors. But you will see why I'm using those two polar opposites in a moment. Now, using a example which is kind of related, Depeche Mode, of course. If we take the Violator album, the second track on Violator is Sweetest Perfection. And you will be surprised how many fans, not hardcore fans, but kind of casual fans, were quite surprised to hear that the Sweetest Perfection is Martin's voice and not Dave Gaughan's voice. Now, to me or to you, a hardcore fan would be like, what the fuck, man? Of course, Dave and Martin's voices are completely different. But if you're not paying attention, you'll be forgiven for thinking they're the same. And that is indeed the case with Tears for Fears, if we look at Curt's voice and Roland's voice. In fact, when I was interviewing Dave Bascombe last year for part of my Music for the Masses Depeche Mode album review series, whilst we were setting the cameras up, we spoke a little bit about Tears for Fears, because I want to delve deeply into Tears for Fears albums later on this year and probably do some song breakdowns and album reviews. And whilst we were setting up, I was speaking to Dave Bascombe, who obviously was the producer of Songs of the Big Chair. And I said to Dave Bascombe, I said, I could never hear the difference between Roland and Curt's voice. And Dave Bascombe was like, really? Come on, Vaughn, you're a musician, you're a producer, you should know. I said, I know. And I think in the case of Dave Bascombe, to actually be the recording engineer and actually having them, in their human form, you could obviously hear those differences. But I think to the public, once you put those voices into a mix and, the effects are added and they're polished and presented, a lot of people will be forgiven for thinking, is that Curt or is that Roland? Now, obviously, for the hardcore Tears for Fears fans, that is just a sinful thing to say. But I think, as my friend Andy McNabb from the Electronic Cafe, he always rates Roland as one of the most outstanding singers of our generation. And indeed, saying that, when I was listening to songs, if I listen to songs like Change, and in fact, if you want to get into Tears for Fears, I would recommend the Tears Roll Down, the greatest hits from 82 to 92, that sort of 10-year span of songs. Of course, they've gone on to do many great records after that, but that to me kind of defined them, and it's a great way to kind of get a taste of what they're all about. And indeed, listening to that from the beginning to the end, try and differentiate between Roland's vocals and Curt's vocals. Now, let's use some vocal coaching examples as to why I think people will confuse Roland's voice and Curt's voice. Now, remember, this is just my interpretation. I'm not saying I'm right. Now, when I do these demonstrations, understand that I'm going to exaggerate the voices. I'm not trying to sound like them. I'm just trying to explain to you how I think it is they use their voices. And in doing so, I need to exaggerate in order to get the point across. So let's take Roland, Curt, and Dave Gaughan from Depeche Mode. Those three singers use the same, although they've got different types of voices, of course. The way they use their voices are quite similar. And what they utilize is what we call in vocal coaching, when singing, as a lower larynx position. Now, in order to achieve, your larynx, it's very difficult to, if I tell you to lower your larynx consciously, you probably wouldn't know how to do it. But in order to lower your larynx, it usually lowers when you yawn. When you yawn, your larynx will naturally go down. Now, to achieve that Dave Gaughan, Curt Smith, Roland Orzabal sound, think of when you yawn, your voice goes deeper, and there's something happens, and I'm head over heels, hurts down here. It's also the same position for shout, shout, let it all out, please. It's also the same position for let me take you on a trip around the world and back. Can you see? It's a lower larynx position. The same for all around me are familiar faces, worn out places. You see? Okay, stay with me. Now, let's jump to the other extreme end of the spectrum. Axl Rose. Let's take November Rain, which is, in my opinion, one of the most outstanding ballads ever written. I absolutely love it. In fact, we'll do a video on that. But now, Axl Rose utilizes the pharyngeal singing. And a lot of those American rockers do that. Bon Jovi, Aerosmith, lots of examples. Now, I'm going to use an exaggerated example here. Let's take November Rain. When I look into your eyes, I can see your love is strained. It's kind of, and then he goes, darling, when I hold you, it's if you try and go, it's kind of like a, yeah, it sounds quite crude when you do it that way. But as I say, in order to get this across, I need to exaggerate it. Now, this pharyngeal singing, which is, if you go, it's kind of like a buzzing sound. It's also known as twang. And that twang buzzing sound is very useful for styles like that kind of heavy rock, or even like Bon Jovi, if we go like, I want to lay you down in a bed of roses. It kind of cuts through. And it also helps you hit a higher note with a lot less stress and strain. Now, if you were to try and sing I want to lay you down in a bed of roses in a lower larynx position, in the same way that Roland and Curt and Vaughn use their voices, it would be hard. It would be like, I want to lay you down in a bed. You can do it, but it's like it's kind of pulling in the sort of bass region. Whereas if you go, I want to lay you down in a bed of roses, it's easier. And you'll also find, you also learn this when you do that Bon Jovi type of, or Axl Rose kind of music. Notice that when they sing, they often have this kind of smile, because when you do this kind of smile and you place the resonance to the top of your head and to the front of your nose, I don't want to go off topic here, but it gives you this kind of forward sound. Another great example I'm thinking now is Gene Pitney. Something's gotten hold of my head, dragging my soul and my senses apart. Okay, that's going a little bit off topic, but you see, it's that kind of that pharyngeal. Now, apparently, when you sing pharyngally, which is that buzzing sound, it allows you to achieve a much higher volume. It's something like up to 500% or something like that. It is ridiculously higher. Now, as you can see, I'm using two extreme polar opposites. Now, of course, Curt, Roland, and Vaughn being on this side, and Axl Rose and Bon Jovi and those singers, Gene Pitney, being on that side. There are a lot of singers in between here who kind of use different variances of resonance and pharyngeal and lower larynx positions. There are a lot of in between examples, but the reason I'm focusing on these two extreme polar opposites is obviously for the demonstration. So this is the only reason why I think people would confuse Roland's voice for Curt, is because they both use their voice in the same kind of way. They both sing in a lower larynx position. All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces. It's not all around me are familiar faces, worn out places. On the sort of pharyngeal side. Now, no way of singing is wrong. In fact, this is what is so fascinating about the human voice, is the sheer complexity of the human voice. In fact, if you're a musician or or rather a producer or a record engineer, you will know that mixing and processing a human voice is one of the most difficult instruments to get within a record, because every instrument has different degrees of resonance and dynamics, but a human voice has got incredible amounts of dynamic range. I mean, a human voice, you think you can go from the quietest whisper to the loudest scream. Also, if you just look at all the different dialects in the world, all the different accents from different cultures, the way different people talk. You know, me as growing up in South Africa, I learned a language called Afrikaans, which is hoe gaan dit met jou, which means how's it going with you. But I can go hoe gaan dit met jou, or dit is reg, meaning that is right. We can roll our R. We can roll our R's like the Scottish people. They can roll their R's. Now, you ask an English person to do that, a lot of them can't. And it's fascinating that a lot of people from different parts of the world, depending on their culture and upbringing, cannot make certain sounds with their voices. We had a tribe in South Africa. They were called the Xhosas. And that is spelled Xhosa. And the way you say it is Xhosa. Xhosa. They are from the Xhosa tribe. Now, you try and do that. I bet you won't be able to if you didn't grow up in South Africa. Are we going off topic? A little bit. But I think this is what's fascinating about the human voice, is just the huge dynamic range and the ability that the human voice has to make so many different types of colors. But to sum it up, really, I think the reason people get Curt's voice mixed up with Roland's is because although their voices are different, they are kind of utilizing the same mechanics, which is a lower larynx position. Talking about Dave Gaughan's voice has changed a lot over the years. If you listen to a lot of the songs he sings now, in my opinion, some of the songs he sings now, with the way his voice has changed, they just don't sound as good as it used to. But then, of course, in his newer material, it does suits. But that's because his voice has changed. But anyway, funny enough, Roland and Curt's voices haven't changed over the years. So all you need to take away from this is that even if you try and sound like someone, you will never sound exactly like someone because your physiology is completely different. The thickness of your vocal folds is different. Everything about you is different. We all know this. But also the sound of your voice, of your unique voice, is determined by the shape of your skull, and because a lot of the sound resonates through your nasal cavity, and so that is why no two singers will sound the same. But in the case of Roland, Curt Smith, and even Dave Gaughan, utilizing that lower larynx position gives you that sound. Something happens and I'm head over heels. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. So, this is the only explanation as to why I think Roland can sometimes be confused with Curt and vice versa. What do you think? Right, my friends, I think we'll just leave it at that. I hope that has given you some kind of clarity, at least in my mind, why it is that Roland could sometimes sound like Curt and vice versa. I mean, the reality is if you really listen in and you analyze to them, they are completely different. As my friend Andy McNabb says, that Roland is one of the most outstanding singers of our generation. And yeah, I do think that although Tears for Fears have always been very successful, I do sometimes think there is a degree of sort of underratedness about them, because I just think they really wrote some great songs and continue to. And you'll be very pleased to know that obviously since I put on my Tears for Fears records this morning just to kind of brush up for this video, I realized how much I really love this band. And sure, it surprised me that I have not actually spoken about them, and this channel is 2 years old. So you'll be pleased to know that we will be doing some song analysis and breakdowns on songs like, I'm just thinking of Head Over Heels. And whenever I hear that now, I just think of the Donnie Darko movie. And I've got such fond memories about these songs, which I won't jump into now because we'll just go straight down a rabbit hole. But anyway, my friends, I want you to leave your comments below. Let me know what you think about Tears for Fears. But mainly the question to you is, do you also struggle to sometimes hear the difference between Curt and Roland? Or do you think it's like, no, they're completely different? Or, do you see why sometimes people would confuse the two voices? anything you want to say. I would love to hear what you have to say. And my friends, I want to thank you as always for being here. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And as I say, a lot more to come, a lot more Tears for Fears. Be safe, be good, and I will see you soon on the next video. Adios.